Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Rosensweet, mom of 3 young people, peaceful parenting coach, and your cheerleader and guide on all things parenting. Each week, we'll cover the tools, strategies, and support you need to end the yelling and power struggles and encourage your kids to listen and cooperate so that you can enjoy your family time. I'm happy to say we have a great relationship with our 3 kids. The teen years have been easy and joyful, not because we're special unicorns, but because my kids were raised with peaceful parenting. I've also helped so many parents just like you stop struggling and enjoy their kids again. I'm excited to be here with you today and bring you the insight and information you need to make your parenting journey a little more peaceful. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. Today my guest is Dr. Liz Angoff, who is an educational psychologist. She does testing, looking at helping kids understand how their brain works and helping their adults understand how their children's brains work. She has loads of wonderful resources, which we will link to in the show notes. I love how Dr. Liz takes this approach, and it's about how our brains can work in different ways. And understanding that really can help to make our child understand themselves and us understand our child in a better way. As you'll hear in this conversation with Dr. Liz, she really talks about how if your child is experiencing some challenges or struggles, or you're experiencing some struggles or challenges with them, it can be helpful to get an assessment and possibly a diagnosis to understand exactly what's going on and how your child's brain works, whether it could be anxiety or depression or neurodivergence or learning challenges or any sorts of things that can be uncovered through psychological testing, really understand the difference in your child's brain that could be making life feel more challenging for them and or for you. And she has a beautifully neurodiversity affirming lens where she talks about, you'll hear her talk about this in the episode, of looking at a child's brain in terms of both the strengths and the challenges. As always, we would love if you would share this episode with anyone you think might find it useful, and leave us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast player app, and leave us a review. It really helps us to reach more families and therefore help more families. We've added sponsors to our podcast so we can keep making this podcast and our other free content to support families on their peaceful parenting journey. If you would like to listen to the podcast ad-free, or even if you'd just like to support our work and know you're helping us educate and support the word about peaceful parenting, you can become a supporter on Substack. You can get the podcast ad-free, as well as access to a monthly Ask Me Anything session where I answer your questions and support you. I know there are folks I support on Substack because I believe in the work they're doing and I want to be part of making their work possible and more accessible. I really hope you'll choose to support us. Go to sarahrosensweet.substack.com or just search up my name and Substack and you'll find it. Hey, it's Sarah here. If you've ever wished you had a parenting coach in your pocket, I want to invite you to join my Peaceful Parenting membership. Inside the membership, you get ongoing real support as you practice peaceful parenting in real life with your real kids. We meet for live coaching twice a week. We dive into monthly themes like strong-willed kids or sibling struggles, friendship troubles, and more. And you get access to an amazing community of parents who truly get it. You really don't have to figure this out on your own. You don't have to try a strategy once and hope it sticks, which is like throwing spaghetti at the wall, right? In the membership, you get guidance, reassurance, and personalized coaching so that you can build a calmer home, stronger relationship with your child, and more confidence in yourself. Here's what a member has to say about the Peaceful Parenting membership. I have followed Sarah for a while now, and she's been such an important part of my peaceful parenting journey. I started listening to her podcast, and I liked her so much that I took her Peaceful Parenting course, which was great. The content is so good and bite-sized, and I was able to complete the whole course. My experience was so positive that I then joined her membership, and again, I was not disappointed. Having weekly access to Sarah through office hours helped our family so much when we were going through a difficult moment with our 4-year-old. Sarah, I have so much admiration for you and your team and your wonderful mission of making this world a better place. Thank you so much. You're always in my thoughts. If you'd love more support and more peace, you can join us. Just go to reimaginepeacefulparenting.com/membership. That's reimaginepeacefulparenting.com/membership. If you would like to listen to the podcast ad-free, or even if you'd just like to support our work and know you're helping us educate and spread the word about peaceful parenting, you can become a supporter on Substack. For the cost of one fancy coffee a month, You can get the podcast ad-free as well as access to a monthly Ask Me Anything session where I answer your questions and support you. Go to sarahrosensweet.substack.com or just search up my name in Substack and you'll find it. Now back to the podcast. All right, let's meet Dr. Liz. Hello, Dr. Liz. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here, Sarah.
Me too. So tell us about who you are and what you do before we dive in.
Right. Well, I go by Dr. Liz, and I am a licensed educational psychologist. I'm in the Bay Area, California, and my focus, my passion is working with kids to understand how their brains work. So I'm a testing psychologist, so I do assessment to understand when things are challenging for kids, why things are challenging, and what we're going to do to really support them. But one of the things that really caught my interest a number of years ago is that so often we bring kids through the assessment process and we don't talk to them about what they did or what we learned about them. So I got really passionate about talking to kids directly about how they can understand their brains, what comes easily for them, how they can really use their strengths to help them thrive, and then what's challenging and what they can do to advocate for themselves and support themselves. So all of my work has been really focused on that question. How do we help kids understand themselves?
Which is perfect because that's exactly why I wanted to have you on. I've had so many parents ask me like, well, how do I, I've got the assessment. How do I tell them? Do I tell them? How do I tell them? We're going to get into all of that. But first I want to start with, what are some signs? Like, I imagine some of the people listening are already going to have had assessments or are going to be in the process of getting an assessment. But there also are some people who maybe, at least in our world, what we look at is if you feel like you're struggling way more than everybody else, that could be one sign that if you've already made shifts and you're trying to practice, in our case, peaceful parenting, and you're still finding that things are really hard, that could be a sign that you might want to get an assessment. But what are some signs that you look for that you might want to get your child assessed?
Yeah, I mean, you named a couple of them that I think are actually really, really important. That all kids have times when they struggle. Growing up is hard. There's a lot of challenges, and they're really important challenges that kids face. They need to know that it's okay when things are hard. They need to know that they can do hard things and come out the other side. And there's so much out there. What I think of as parenting 101, that it just helps us figure out how do we help our children navigate these tough times. And then there's kind of the next level where you might get a little extra support. So, you read a book on parenting, or you find a different approach that matches your child, the way your child shows up in the world a little bit better. You might meet with the school and get a little bit of extra help. Sometimes they're called student study teams or SSTs. You might meet with the teacher and the team. And then for some kids, for a lot of kids, for most kids, that little extra boost is enough to get them through those hard times. But for some kids, there's still questions. That next level, that extra support, it's still not working. Things are still hard, and we don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have that question, why isn't this working? It works for so many kids. It's not working for my child. That's when an assessment can be really, really helpful to get at the why and the so what. So the why is, why are things harder for my child, and why are the traditional things that help most children not working? And then the so what is so what do we do about it? How do we do things differently? And for kids who are wired differently, they need different things. And that's what we focus on in the assessment process.
And so what kinds of, if, we've gotten extra support, that, we've educated ourselves and things are still hard for our child, or maybe hard for us too at home with our child, right? And what are the kinds of things that, what are the kinds of things that you assess for, I guess is the best way. I mean, the big ones I think about are ADHD, autism, but what else might be the possibilities that are going on?
hmm I really think of assessment at the core of it is understanding how this child's brain works. And the diagnoses that we look at, a diagnosis is just like a kind of a way to orient us towards the path of support that's going to be most helpful. But even, ADHD, autism, dyslexia, all these things that might be common to look for, they show up differently in different kids. And there are diagnostic criteria, but they mix and match a little bit. No
Mhm.
two ADHDers show up the same way. No two autistic kids show up the same way. Even dyslexic kids show up really differently. And so at the core of it, we're trying to figure out what makes this child's brain unique
Mhm.
and what are the unique strengths and challenges that they have. And we're going to be able to explain that. A shortcut for explaining that might be dyslexia or might be autism or ADHD. We might also be looking at things like anxiety and depression that can
Mhm.
really affect kids in a big way. Sometimes related to other brain styles, because navigating the world as a different kind of brain is really hard and can lead to a lot of anxiety and depression. Sometimes anxiety can look like ADHD, for example, because it really hijacks your attention, makes it really hard to sit still at school, when your brain is on high alert all of the time. So we're really trying to piece apart what's the root cause of the challenges that a child is facing, so that we know what to do about it. I think some other things that we look at, one of the big questions that comes to me is there are some really challenging behaviors that kids have, and we want to know what's underneath that. And sometimes there might be questions about sensory dysregulation, or emotional dysregulation, just real difficulty understanding the emotions that are coming up and what to do about them. Some kids get hit like by a tsunami by their their emotions. And so learning how to regulate or manage those big feelings that come in, might be something that we're looking at. And that may be it might be part of a bigger diagnosis. Um, but more importantly, it's something that we really want to understand so that we can support a child in that way, regardless of what we call it.
That makes so much sense, and it makes me think about my daughter who's 18 now, and she's just for anyone listening, she's okay with me talking about her, assessment and diagnoses. And I think sometimes when you talk about there's challenging behavior and we think we know why there's that challenging behavior, but sometimes we can be totally wrong. Like I remember when she was in elementary school, her teachers would always, one teacher after another, would always talk about how she was repeatedly at their desks asking, what do I do next? How, asking for instruction. And she's a kid who's really, connection is super important to her. And I always thought it was because she was looking for more connection from the teacher, that she was always at their side. And that was like a quote, good reason to go up and talk to the teacher because she loved her teachers. And then come to find out when we had her assessed that she has working memory challenges. And she actually literally couldn't remember what the next thing to do was because she could only kind of keep one or two things in her head at a time. And that was really helpful information. And it like completely sort of shifted how her teachers and how I saw how her teachers reported her classroom behavior.
Isn't that amazing? Just getting at the why, getting underneath and figuring out the why completely shifts our perspective on things. And I think that for a lot of kids, that kind of first line parenting, for a lot of kids, yeah, they're looking for connection, they're looking for that. It makes total sense that that would be our first assumption.
Hmm.
And for some kids, that's just not true.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so when we do the assessment, we find out this information that's so important to understanding what's going on. And for your daughter to understand, oh, there's this thing called working memory. And that is different in my brain than in
Mhm.
other brains. So I'm not dumb or lazy or all these labels we give each other, give ourselves. It's, oh, I have a working memory challenge. So let's brainstorm some ways that I might be able to work with the way that my working memory works. And that might be asking the teacher. That might work for everybody. But there might be something else that works. And there's any number of strategies we can use to really help her once we know what that is. And when we talk to kids about it, we can brainstorm with them to figure out what that best strategy is gonna be that works for our child, that works for the teacher, that works for everybody that's involved.
Yeah, for sure. It's so illuminating. There were so many things about her diagnosis when she got assessed that helped so much to explain behavior that a lot of people found perplexing, and also that ways she could understand herself and make adjustments that she needed to be successful. For example, even now she's in first year college, and she knows this has been continuing through her whole school career, but she knows because of her focus challenges, she can't really do any homework after 6 o'clock at night because she's just like her focus is just not good. She can try, but it's really hard for her. So she plans her day around, I know that I've only got until 6 o'clock to really get my good work done. So she'll even come home, do homework, and then go back into the city and go to the gym or something, where other people might, do it the other way around. So I think it just knowing for kids to know how their brain works is really setting themselves up for success.
I love
Yeah. So, which brings me to the next question I was going to ask you, and I think you've kind of already answered it, or we have been talking together, is um, anything you want to add about why it's important to get an assessment? I mean, you really talked about helping kids understand how their brain works and really getting to the root of the problem and helping, the people around them understand how their brain works. Is there anything else that you want to add about why we would want to get an assessment that we haven't already talked about?
Yeah, well, one of the things we talk about a lot is that an assessment can result in a label of sorts, that diagnosis is a kind of label, and something I get asked a lot is, um, I what do we do when parents feel nervous about having their child have a label? There is, as much as I am a proponent and supporter and celebrator of neurodiversity, the truth is that our society still has some, pretty challenging stereotypes of what it means to be ADHD or autistic or to have a different way that
And
your brain
stigma.
is wired. There's
Yes.
stigma, yeah,
Yeah.
that's the word. And so I think it's a real fear that families have. Um, there's a couple things that are important to know about these quote unquote labels that we have. And one is that the world is changing. We are understanding these diagnoses in a totally different way as not something that's broken or needs to be fixed, but something that is different, that's a normal variation of how brains appear in the world. And that is a real change that is happening in our world. And that label can be, as you were just saying, can be so, so helpful as a way to guide what we do to really support our children so that they can be successful. And like your example with your daughter, that they can learn how to work with their brain so that they can be really successful. I think it's brilliant that she knows that after 6 o'clock, my brain won't study anymore so that
Mhm.
she can make that simple change that is the difference between feeling like a failure and feeling like a success, being able to navigate. Um, and I think that the more dangerous thing and the scarier piece is the labels that we give children that aren't properly diagnosed. And those labels are, the labels that kids might give themselves, like, "I must be dumb," or the labels that others give kids, that this is a lazy child, this is a defiant child. Those labels are so much more, uh, negative and harmful to our kids because it's telling them there's something wrong with them. And these diagnoses, are they labels? Yes, they're labels, but I would argue that they are such helpful guideposts for us in understanding this is a difference, not
Mhm.
a deficiency.
I love that, and I've heard people say that you can, avoid getting a diagnosis for your child because you don't wanna have them labeled, but they will still get labeled just with the wrong labels instead of the right labels.
Exactly.
Yeah. I
Mhm.
know people who, I have a friend who didn't find out until, they were in their early or late teens, I guess, that they had, inattentive ADHD, and they spent years unlearning, "I'm just lazy," and, I'm a lazy person, that's why I have trouble doing things on time, and really unlearning that bad idea of themselves that had got put on them when they weren't aware of their inattentive ADHD.
Exactly.
Yeah. I also have another friend who got diagnosed as autistic late in life, and they wish that they had known that so much earlier because they spent, they're one of those people that back when they were a child, the diagnostic criteria missed them, right? Like they were just
Mhm.
like quirky, odd, like the little professor type of autistic kid. And but they spent their whole life thinking there's something wrong with me. I just don't know what it is, but I know I feel different from everybody else and like searching for what is this thing that's wrong with me, right? And finding it in all sorts of things that weren't actually, obviously there's not anything wrong with them. They're just autistic, but thinking, how different their life would have been if they had known that and hadn't spent all those years trying to figure out why they felt so different from everybody else. If you've been looking for a way to bring a little more calm, independence, and less screen time into your home, I want to tell you about one of my favorite kid-friendly tools, the Yoto Player. Yoto is a screen-free audio player designed just for kids. They pop in a little card and can choose stories, music, educational content totally on their own. And if you're a peaceful parenting family, you're going to love this part. It gives your child real autonomy in a safe, parent-approved way. They're in charge, you can relax, and all the content is kid-appropriate. Parents use the Yoto for quiet time, car rides, and especially bedtime routines. The built-in nightlight and okay to wait clock make evenings smoother and help kids settle into rest. And the storytelling supports language development, imagination, and self-regulation. I also love that once the cards are downloaded, the player works offline and on the go. No Wi-Fi, no ads, no worries. You're actually not even connected to the internet, so safety is not something you have to worry about. If you want a screen-free way to support calm connection and independence, check out the Yoto Player. You can learn more at reimaginepeacefulparenting.com/Yoto. That's reimaginepeacefulparenting.com/Yoto, YOTO. If you would like to listen to the podcast ad-free, or even if you'd just like to support our work and know you're helping us educate and spread the word about peaceful parenting, you can become a supporter on Substack. Go to sarahRosensweet.substack.com or just search up my name in Substack and you'll find it. Now back to the podcast.
Exactly. And that's what the research is showing us too, that so many individuals that are diagnosed as adults had these really harmful and unhelpful narratives as kids. And the first emotion that those diagnosed as adults feel is this relief that, oh, that's why things, feel different for me. The second emotion I find so much more interesting because across the board, the second thing that people report is anger. And it's anger at having lost decades to
Mm-hmm.
those, you know, false narratives
Right.
that were so unhelpful. And I think that there's kind of two facets to my passion about talking to kids, and one was understanding that kids they often know that something is different about them way before we even pick up on it. No matter how old they are, they have this sense that, oh, I'm walking through the world in a different way. So the earlier we can have these conversations with them, the better, because we have this opportunity to rewrite that narrative for them. But the second huge piece for me was working with adults and doing that late, kind of later in life diagnosis and hearing time after time, story after story about adults who are completely rewriting their self narrative through the process of our assessment. And what a relief that is and how frustrating it is that they've lost so much time not knowing
Yeah.
and now having to kind of to go through the process of identity formation again
Mhm.
because they have this new critical piece of information that helps them understand things so differently about their childhood, their young adulthood, depending on how old they are.
Yeah, it's so important. And when you just said kids often know that there's something different about them, I remember my daughter, so she didn't I I think partly because an ex I not saying this to toot my own horn, but I'm an extraordinarily patient person. And
Mhm.
so some of the things about her ADHD, so she has an ADHD diagnosis, and some of the things about that, I think it took me a long time to sort of think, "Okay, this is unusual," that these behaviors are still happening because I was so patient with it, and I think other parents may have been, a little less patient at an earlier age and gotten her and I feel bad about that because I wish she had gotten her assessment earlier. I think it would have been helpful for her. But I remember one thing that spurred me to finally seek an assessment was she asked me what ADHD was. She was probably 9, 10 maybe, and I told her, and she said, "I have that." Like, she just really, like, she was like, "I have that," and I'm like, "Really?" Like, anyways, it was just interesting.
I think kids know. I've had that experience so many times, I can't even tell you, like,
Mhm.
that I'm halfway through a feedback session with a child and I haven't told them yet, and they come out with, "Do I have ADHD?" Or in the middle of the assessment, they're wondering about it and asking, and I'm saying, "Well, what do you understand about ADHD, and why are you asking that question?" And I can kind of get more information from them and let them know we don't know yet, but that's what we're here for. We're exploring your brain and we're
Yeah.
trying to understand it. But I think the information, I mean, that just speaks to how much our world is changing. This information is out there in the world. We're talking about it, which I think is so important to normalizing the fact that brains come in all different shapes and sizes and ways of being. And so, it becomes, a point of discussion that is like a really open point of discussion about, I wonder how my brain is wired.
Mhm, mhm. So interesting. I'm pretty sure I know the answer that you're gonna give. If you do get a diagnosis of something, ADHD or autism, should you tell your child?
So, I do believe that we should be talking to kids about how their brains work. And I want to be really, um mindful of the parent journey as I talk about this. And I think that the most important piece is that as a parent, you understand how your child's brain works and that you go through your own process of integrating that with how you see your child. And that's a really important journey and a huge piece of the journey because when we start talking to kids about how their brains work, we need to be really confident as adults. And so I think that while I see this as so important, talking to kids about their diagnosis, I want to make sure that parents are taking time and space to understand it themselves first.
I love that. That's such a sensitive answer because if say you get the diagnosis of your child and to you it feels like, it's this horrible thing, that would not be a good frame of mind to tell your child about their diagnosis in, right? So really working through your own fears and your own getting, proper information about what the diagnosis means before you go to your child with that information.
Exactly, and understanding what it means and what it doesn't mean, because there's a lot of messages out there, especially around autism and ADHD, that are negative, that your child is broken in some way, we need to fix them, we need to make them more normal, whatever that means. I mean, all these messages are, not helpful, not accurate, so we're, really diving into the neurodiversity affirming framework around these different neurotypes or brain types is a really important piece to give yourself time to process as a parent. That said, I do think that being able to have a really supportive conversation with your child about what did we learn about the assessment? We already talked about the kids know something's different about them before we know. And so when they go through the assessment process, there's no hiding from them that we're doing something different for you. And they're the ones that go through all these different activities as part of the assessment. They're working very hard. And as an assessor, I'm very transparent with kids. We're here to understand how your brain works. Because I was trained to tell kids, we're going to play a lot of brain games and it's going to be super fun. You'll get prizes, which it is fun until we do the thing that's hard for you. And then suddenly it's not fun anymore. And kids are like, huh, I feel like you're not telling me the whole truth.
This is not
They
fun.
pick up on it, right? So I tend to be really transparent with kids. We're here to understand how your brain works. Some of the things that we do, your brain is going to find fun and maybe even easy to do. Some of the things are really going to challenge your brain. You might learn something new while you're here. If something's challenging, I want you to tell me about it and we're going to figure it out together. Ooh, that's going to be really interesting. So we're already talking to kids about what's strong. And I use a construction metaphor that I can go into, but we talk about their brain highways and we talk about their construction projects, what they're working on. So kids are already learning so much about their brain as part of the assessment. And even without sharing the diagnosis, we can talk to them about what we learned so that there's some demystifying there. I went through this whole thing and now everyone's talking behind my back. They're having a bunch of meetings. There must be something wrong with me. But instead, we can say, I learned so many cool things about your brain. I learned that you were strong in this, and I learned that we're going to work on this. And so that's really helpful for me as a parent. And then if we do have a diagnosis, what it adds when we share that with kids is they know that they are not alone. It gives context. It lets them know that this is not that while the way that their brain works is unique, there are lots of people out there that have very similar brains who have been really successful with that kind of brain. That there's a path laid out, that we know what to do to work with your unique brain. Um, and so it really helps them feel like I'm not alone in this. It's not weird or broken in any way, that this is just a different way to be in the world and that there's a roadmap for me.
I love that. Yeah, I often when I'm talking to parents and, often after a couple of parent coaching sessions, there'll be some things that make me say like, has anyone ever asked you if you were considering an, ADHD assessment for your child? Like I try to, because I'm not a clinician, I can't diagnose anyone with anything, but there are certainly things that come up that make me think like, I think these people should get an assessment. And, often I try to be really as positive as I can, but often they do have these really negative associations with, for example, with ADHD. And I say like, how many entrepreneurs, there's like way more entrepreneurs that have ADHD than the general population, and way more like Olympic athletes and professional athletes. And, there are things that are just, research statistic backed that you can say that are positive about this differently wired brain.
Right. I love the research on entrepreneurship and ADHD. I think that it's so amazing how well equipped the ADHD brain is to be in a space where we're disrupting the status quo and trying new things, thinking outside of the box, really using that creativity. And it's just a world that needs this kind of brain
Hmm.
to, um, to really move us forward. That more neurotypical brains that work well with the way that society is built might not be as motivated to disrupt things in that positive way that moves us forward.
I love that. What are some other things that, I feel like we've kind of covered most of the questions that I had planned on asking you, but are there any things that I haven't asked you or that we haven't touched on? You've modeled some really beautiful ways of of how to talk to your child about how their brain works. Maybe you want to go into your construction metaphor a little bit more, or maybe there's some other things that we haven't covered that you want to talk about.
Sure. Well, I have I think that, one of the things that may be really helpful is thinking about what is the script for telling kids about their diagnosis. And the way that I've found most helpful is using this construction metaphor because it is pretty universal and it has so many places you can go with it. And it just gives you a way to start the conversation. And so for parents, it may sound something like, you went through this whole process, and I'm so grateful that you did, because we were able to learn some really cool things about your brain. Is it okay if I share that with you? So asking that permission to start the conversation, because it is vulnerable for kids. You want to make sure that it's the right time and place. And most of the time, opening it like that will pique kids' curiosity. And so they're like, yeah, of course I want to know what you learned. Um, and then you might say, I learned that we can think of your brain like a something that's under construction, like the construction sites we see on the side of the road, that we're always building our brain. And the way your brain works is that the different parts of your brain communicate through these neurons that make connections like little tiny roads in your brain. And we learned that some of those roads are like highways for your brain. We learned that you have so many strengths. And so, for example, we learned that you maybe have a great vocabulary and really express yourself well. We learned about your creativity, and when you're really passionate about something, you can focus in so amazingly well on that. Um, we learned that you're a really loyal friend, or maybe that you have a really strong memory for stories, whatever it is. We learned that you have these highways. We also know that some parts of your brain are under construction. Like, you might remember when you were little, you didn't know how to ride a bike yet, but then your brain had to put all those things together, and now you ride your bike all the time. Do you remember kind of building that road? Well, there's some new roads that we're working on. And so we might be working on one of the things we learned that's under construction for your brain is something called working memory. And I think that's why you're asking your teacher all the time for the next step, because you're doing something, you're advocating for yourself, because your brain does best when it gets one piece of information at a time. And that was so important for me to learn as a parent. So, and when we put these things together, lots of people have highways and construction zones just like yours. In fact, we have a name for it. We call that ADHD. When you have such a creative, passionate brain that loves to focus on the things that you are really into, but sometimes have difficulty keeping stuff in mind, this working memory piece, that's what we call ADHD. And it turns out there's lots and lots of people who have ADHD brains just like yours. And we can look at those people. So that's kind of how I go through with kids. We're really talking about their highways and construction projects and helping them understand that. And then repackaging it with that name for it, that there's a name for how your brain works. And that's where we start. And then from there, we can use that metaphor to keep building the next thing, working on the next construction project as we move forward.
Would there be anything specifically different or similar, I guess, about talking about an autism diagnosis for kids with that construction metaphor?
Yeah, so we use the same metaphor, but the highways and construction zones, for every kid are going to be a little different. So for an autistic kid, if I, think of one kid in particular, we might say that we learn that you have this really passionate brain that loves engineering and building, and you're on the things you did with Dr. Liz, where you had to solve puzzles and use logic, that was a highway in your brain. And we know that, you're that one of the ways that your brain works really well is, when you have space to move and to be able to use your body in different ways. And then some of the things that might be under construction are, usually I'll start with something that a child has told me is more challenging for him or her. Um, and so how you said that sometimes other kids might say things that feel confusing or you're not sure what they mean. That's something that might be um might be harder for your brain, or something that is a construction project that we'll work on with you, so that it's easier to understand other kids. And when we
Mhm.
put these things together, when kids have brains that are really passionate, pay attention to details, that love engineering, but have trouble figuring out what other kids are saying or meaning, then we call that autism. And it's a different way of a brain being in the world. And so as you learn to work with your autistic brain, you'll figure out how to really dive deep into your passions, and you'll be able to thrive, find the connections that you want, and we're here to help.
I love that, and I love how when you talk about construction zones, it's full of promise too, right? I read something from someone that or that, that you can work on things. What I mean, full of promise, that there are things that can be worked on that might feel, like, hard or confusing now, but it doesn't leave a child with a sense of, like, "I'll never be able to figure it out, and it's always gonna be this way."
Yeah, one of the ways the construction metaphor has really evolved is that for some things we're building that road, and for some things we're finding a different way to get there.
Mm.
And one of the things that I write in my books is that you might build a road there, or you might find a totally different way to get there. And in the new book for parents, there's a picture of a flying car, kind of flying over the construction zone. And I think that it's really true for our kids that for some skills there might be some things that we need to learn and really build that pathway in our brain, but for some things there might just be a different way. And I think, for autistic kids, for example, they might connect with others in really different ways. And so it's like building a totally new way to get there, building a different road, taking the scenic route. There's so many ways we can adapt the metaphor to say we're still going to get you to your goal where you want to go, but your road might look really different than somebody else's, and that's okay. It's going to be the best road for you.
I love that because it also, I mean, not only is it promising that you're gonna get to where you wanna go, but it also, I think, helps relieve parents of an idea that I see sometimes where they want their kids to be more like neurotypical kids, right? Like, that they think that's the only way to get to the goal is for them to have, just using the example of, social connections. The social connections of an autistic kid might be really, really strong, but look totally different from the social connections of a neurotypical kid.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. That reminds me of something that I was gonna ask you earlier and I forgot, which was, you mentioned that sometimes when you get a diagnosis, you have a clinician who wants to try to tell you how you should, change your child or help them be more, quote, normal or more typical. And that clearly would be from somebody who's not very neurodiversity affirming. But what are some things to look out for that might be sort of, I guess, red flags or green flags in terms of the person that you're looking for to do an assessment, or if you've already got the assessment, what they're how they're interpreting the diagnosis that might be more or less helpful?
Yeah, so I love this question because I think one of the most important questions you can ask a clinician when you are looking for an assessment is, how do you involve my child in the assessment, or what will you tell them about what you learned? And looking for somebody who is really well versed in how do I talk to the child about it, is going to tell you that they're really thinking about how do we frame this in a way that's going to be helpful and affirming to a young child. Because anybody who's really thinking about how do I communicate this in a way that's going to make sense to a small person, um, has really been thinking about how do we think about the whole person and how we capitalize on those strengths. And so that is, kind of a tell to say that this person is thinking in this more holistic way and not just about, does this child fit the diagnostic criteria? If you've had an assessment with somebody that is more coming from that medical lens, that we've all been trained in. This is so new, and so a lot of clinicians were trained from this medical lens, which is looking at what are the child's deficits and do they meet criteria from this diagnostic manual that we have, the DSM, that is a list of things that are hard or quote unquote wrong. And so, from there, I think really getting connected with some more affirming resources. I have a ton on my website that can be really, really helpful. There's a spreadsheet of ways of talking about autism, ADHD, dyslexia, behavior, anxiety, OCD in really affirming ways. And so just immersing yourself in those resources so you can get that positive language for talking to your child, or working with the next practitioner, a therapist, a tutor who has experience working from a neurodiversity affirming lens so that you can help to translate those testing results into something that's going to really be focused on how do we help your child thrive with the brain that they have.
Thank you. That makes so much sense. This has been so helpful. And I think that so many parents are going to find this really useful in how to talk to their kids and how to think about it themselves. So thank you so much for joining us and telling us about all this stuff. You mentioned a couple of books, so we'll get your books in the show notes for folks, but where else is the best place for people to go and find out more about you and what you do?
Yeah, so I have a ton of free resources for parents on explainingbrains.com. There are articles, like just very, very short, parent-friendly articles with both the strengths, the highways, and common construction projects for ADHD brains, for autistic brains, for dyslexic brains, for kids who have difficulty regulating behavior, anxiety, intellectual disability, just ways of explaining so many different types of brains, as well as what we do about things like screen time or talking about medication. So hopefully that resource is helpful for parents. And then I have a brand new book out for our parents called Our Brains. And it is a interactive, collaborative workbook that helps you explain a diagnosis to your child. So it's something that you can get after an assessment, and it will walk you through explaining to your child how their brain works, what you learned from the assessment. Or if you have a diagnosis that's been on the table for a long time and you just haven't had that conversation with them yet, it is designed to really help kids not just know, okay, this is my diagnosis, but really understand how their brain works and how they can advocate for what their brain needs to thrive.
Fantastic. That is going to be so helpful for so many parents. Okay, now here's the mystery question that I told you about before we started recording. This is a question I ask all my guests. So if you had a time machine and you could go back in time and give a message to your younger parent self, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh, I would just constantly remind myself that there are so many ways to be in this world and it's all okay. I think even I was amazed that even as somebody who has decades of experience in this field and has made a life out of celebrating neurodiversity, that there was a way that doctors communicated with me from this deficit lens that would just put my mommy brain on high alert all the time when something was just a little bit different. And I really needed just constant reminders that my child is going to show up, how they're going to show up. And that is not only okay, but it is beautiful and amazing and so important to how they are, and the unique contribution they're going to have to this world. And it's something that I've grown into. My child's 7.5 now, and it's something that we get to celebrate all the time, his incredible uniqueness, and celebrate. But I think I remember very distinctly as a new mom, just with all the doctors using their, um, jargony deficit-based language, it was just really hard to keep that solid head on my shoulders. But I think it's a really important message to keep with us that there's just so many ways to be, and it's all amazing.
I love that. Thank you so much for joining us and really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This has been a blast.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I hope you found this conversation insightful and exactly what you needed in this moment. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember that I'm rooting for you. I see you out there showing up for your kids and doing the best you can. Sending hugs over the airwaves today. Hang in there. You've got this.